deferred gratification of murdering someone may be more satisfying because you got to plan the murder,
Right.
but that's obviously a very twisted thing. So
Yeah.
we don't want to say that deferred gratification of something negative is innately good.
Welcome to Thoughts Matter. I'm James Barrow, your host. Today, Michael Bruxvoort is joining me, and I want to talk to Michael about deferred gratification. So,
But we're not going to talk about it today because we're going to defer that gratification.
we're going to defer the conversation about deferred gratification, um, just to give you a lesson on deferred gratification. Now, so Michael,
This is a long time.
let me just, I guess, give some of my general thoughts. So deferred gratification is this idea of putting off your enjoyment of something or putting off something till later so that you can enjoy it more, right?
Yeah.
So I have a theory that we as a human species are wired, I would say God wired us this way, although I suppose that's up for debate, but we're wired to appreciate things more when we have to wait for them. We're wired to appreciate things
Okay.
more when the gratification is deferred than when it's instant. Um, so, and I guess there's some evidence in that direction, but I just look at a lot of different things in my life, and just in like things that determine or that usually are indicators of success. And I think about some of these examples, and I keep on thinking or seeing deferred gratification come up as almost a good in and of itself, almost that deferring gratification is like its own good. And I don't know if that's true or not. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. So there's the basic idea, and then as we go on, maybe I'll talk about some of the examples that I'm thinking of. But what are your thoughts there?
You know, hmm, I like the fact that I'm coming at this topic cold.
Yeah,
Like we haven't discussed this
yeah,
before. Um, and part of the reason I like that is because I'm probably going to answer more honestly than I usually would. Um, I don't like this topic
okay,
because I struggle a lot with demanding instant gratification in my life.
mm-hmm.
And I would say that I have suffered in that by not learning how to truly enjoy life in many ways. Um, and often the things that have been deferred, I've truly enjoyed those a lot more. Things that I think of where, I knew that an event was happening, but I didn't get to go to the event until a couple months later, and I still remember those events because of the anticipation. I think of Christmas. I think of different trips that I've been on, plays that I've gone to. Um, Whereas things where I did it at the last minute and sort of said, oh, I feel like watching a movie tonight. I'll go up to the varsity and see it. Probably not going to remember that as much in hindsight. So just in a sense of perhaps you know, we talk about memory as a sometimes we remember things, sometimes we don't remember things, and I wonder if it has anything to do with how well we remember something.
Yeah,
That if we spent a long time anticipating it, it's going to be a lot more meaningful. Um, I think of um, dates that I went on with my girlfriend, and some of the more memorable ones are the ones that I anticipated a long time in advance. We went to Barnum and Bailey in Burroughs, the last greatest show on earth. It ended last year in
mm-hmm.
May, and we wanted to see it before they went out of style and shut down for forever. And so we went in April. We tickets back in January, early February, because she said, I really, really want to do this. I said, let's do it. We'll drive up to Richmond and watch it. And so we were waiting for a couple months to go to this show, and it would come up every other week, and we talk about it. And because it was a specific time, we had to wait. There wasn't we're going to wait because it's a good thing to do. It was a necessary thing
Yeah.
to wait. But even in those cases where it's necessary, I think it helps with memory because you build the anticipation, and then when it arrives, it either lives up to those expectations or dashes them or was okay, but you have a reference for it.
Interesting.
You have a reference for it. That's my initial.
Yeah.
I have other thoughts, but I'm curious how you react to the memory thing before I say
I
anything
think that's
else.
interesting. Well, yeah. And I think memory can be a source of enjoyment too. And so the more you remember something, something positive, the more you could sense that as being a more enjoyable experience looking back. And I like the idea, the fact that you spend more time thinking about something when you're anticipating it could contribute to the fact that you remember it better, you have that baseline to compare it to, what you're expecting versus what it actually is. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And
And I wonder if there's sort of a sense in which, I mean, we could talk about how humans experience time jumping off of that conversation in terms of
that sounds
experiencing
deep.
something in an instant. Every single moment of my life is a moment. It's an instant. For those of you who've taken calculus, it's the idea of a limit that no instant is actually accessible to us. Um, we kind of flow right past it and it's gone, you know. So I I think that perhaps most of the instances in our lives are completely forgettable because they are instants, because they're moments, because they pass, and you don't ever dwell in those things. You're just living while you experienced them. Whereas anything that an event takes place, you stop your day, you eat lunch. So then later in the day, you remember what you had for lunch because you actually took many incidences, kind of, to eat that lunch. It was an event in the day, a sort of a stopping point. Let's pause for reflection. Perhaps you were looking forward to it because you prepared the lunch in the morning, and so you interacted with that piece of time, not only for a longer piece of time as you experienced it, but because you prepared ahead of time for that moment, you were thinking about it ahead of time, so you experienced it twice. And then every time you were hungry, looking forward to that lunch, you thought about it again during your workday.
Right. And so
And then
it's
as you thought
no.
about falling asleep in the afternoon because you ate the lunch, that's a third time you experienced. So the number of times you experience the lunch increase, and so by the end of the day, you haven't yet forgotten what you had for lunch.
And
Well,
because
how
it
much
was an
more?
event, because it has not only the time in memory, but also the fact that it has a designated time in and of itself, it's no longer instantaneous. It's no longer a point. And that's why it can kind of live on.
Right. And so the more eventish something is, and I think there's several different ways to make things eventish. I think that humans taking the time to dress themselves up and make them look like a bunch of fancy peacocks is a way to make something an event, a significant thing, to pay attention to it. So, in terms of why deferred gratification might be an innately positive thing to a human, deferring the moment of gratification of a specific desire or a need will necessitate you experiencing that desire or need multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time you get to it, it is more eventish. And so therefore afterwards, perhaps you remember it more. So therefore you experience it over a longer period of time and experience therefore just a greater magnitude of enjoyment by pure addition.
That's great. I mean, I think I like that a lot because I think it helps with some of the why. Because I think this is a very observable phenomenon, but I couldn't tell you why. And I think that helps. I don't know if that's all of it, but I think that's interesting.
I mean, I'm just making this up on the
No, I
spot,
know,
so
but
I'd
it's
be
good.
curious to hear how other people would react to it because I've never thought about it
Yeah, and
before.
my ideas are not very solidified on this topic, so it's interesting. Okay, so let me give a few examples of some instances. So have you heard of the marshmallow experiment? You probably have.
Yes,
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about with the kids where they like.
I am the child that just goes ahead and eats the marshmallow.
Okay.
Like that is me. Then this is why I don't like this topic.
I see.
It's because that is me.
Okay. All right. So for those of you who have not seen this study, more or less two kids are given, or I'm sorry, not two kids, but a group of kids, on an individual basis, they're given the option of either eat eat a marshmallow now or wait. They have the marshmallow there sitting on the plate. They're allowed to touch it, do whatever, but they're not allowed to eat it. If they wait, they get two marshmallows. So, some kids would just eat it right then. They're all given the same options of eat it now, get just that one, or eat it later, get two. Some kids would eat it immediately and put off forgo the second marshmallow, and some kids would actually wait till they got the two. And then they followed those kids' lives to see if there was any correlation between that very simple experiment and their success in life. And overall, I believe the consensus is that the people that waited were overall more satisfied, more happy, more successful, whatever. I need to look more into the details of the study, but that's basically the conclusion that people have come to. And so I don't remember exactly when this was conducted. It must have been a while ago for them to have come far enough to us to be able to observe. But it's an interesting experiment regardless. And I think that it points at even just that someone came up with the experiment kind of shows that people have this idea that deferred gratification might be an indicator that the people that are willing to defer, there's something different about that. And it's something that kind of the human nature appreciates or benefits from. And so there's other examples I can point to. Well, I mean, an obvious one is porn or sex. When you wait for a deeper relationship, when you wait for your relationship to go farther, hopefully to marriage before you have sex or whatever. Like that's, I think there's studies confirming. I certainly believe that it's much more meaningful at that point versus people that just seek the instant gratification. There's examples. Let's see. Just putting off, waiting for an event or well, really, I mean, I can give you a personal example.
Here's a dumb example.
Okay,
can I give a dumb example?
Yeah.
So a soda.
Okay.
So I'm living on a very tight budget right now, and I am, I have X amount of money to spend each week, and I can spend that money as I will. And it will be, it is what it is.
Right.
I do have a little bit of flexibility within that, about $10 to $15 a week that I could probably spend on whatever I wanted to. Now, I got in a very bad habit when I was in early college of buying just random sodas and energy drinks and all sorts of things whenever I wanted.
Okay.
And so now that I'm on a budget, suddenly, I mean, I'm obviously trying to not just drink sugary things at all, period. But the principle holds that if I just buy it on an impulse, I say I want a soda, I buy the soda, I drink the soda, it's done. If I set aside in my budget, $3 for a soda next week, and I wait until the end of the week, and I have that $3 left over, and I go and buy that soda, it not only takes the stress off of, am I still within my budget, but there's also an increased moment where I have waited, and the soda is a reward. And I enjoy the soda. I savor that soda. Before, I saw it on the shelf, I bought it, I grabbed it, I swigged it, I drank it, it was gone. Now, this Barks root beer is one of the most beautiful things I've tasted, and I don't know how long, and I'm going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I have the freedom to do so.
Yeah. So I
have freedom to do so.
That's interesting. Okay, we'll have to come back to freedom because that's another thing, kind of like the memory, where it's that might be part of the reason.
The point at which you cross over into talking about freedom is when those non-deferred, when the instant gratifications are, in a sense, stolen pleasures.
To give a personal example, just to give one more, I think not only do we find enjoyment to be increased when we are willing to defer gratification, we're often rewarded in our society, and in general, things like I've worked very hard for several years. I'm still working very hard. I'm at a period in my life where I am working my butt off, and with the goal of some point not having to work quite as hard, or at least not in the same way. Maybe not as many hours, maybe working different types of hours, whatever. So I've gone through different periods of my life, but right now I recognize that I'm in a period of my life where I am working, working, working. And versus if I was to just kind of work less hard, I go through periods where I kind of just focus on just my day job or just something. I'm just doing one thing, and I don't enjoy myself even in the moment. Even though I'm kind of taking I'm not deferring gratification, but I'm also just not enjoying myself even in the present, because at least when I'm working really hard, I can enjoy. I have this anticipation of future enjoyment, and maybe this comes from me. I'm not a workaholic, so I don't think that's where this comes from. But there's something to that where it's like there's just the fact that I'm deferring the gratification even gives me some extra pleasure in the present. But I find that I don't enjoy the cheap pleasure of that I can get from not working as hard in the present when I'm not working towards anything, when I'm actually taking advantage of having time off, or of just spending a whole week doing nothing. When I know that this is a season of my life when I don't necessarily have that luxury, at least I don't need that luxury. This isn't to say that people should work constantly, but right now, because I'm at this point in my life, I think I'm called to work really hard. And so when I do kind of steal those little moments where it's like this, I'm not going to work as hard right now. I don't even enjoy it as much. So that's where I start to think, I wonder if there's something to just deferred gratification. It's just the way that we're wired, but it's also the way our society kind of rewards us for it, and our psychologically rewarded for it. I don't know. So this is kind of what prompted me to think about the topic.
Right. Yeah. I think there's also, I think deferred, I think deferred gratification is definitely a part of that. But I think that it also has to do with the idea of being that labor is a gift, that work is a gift, and we don't see it that way because we complain about Mondays, and
Right.
we talk about hump days, and we talk about Friday nights and think about a TGIF, and so we
I
view
ate there
work
for
as
the
a
first
negative
time last
thing.
Friday. It was pretty decent. I had a good burger.
Yeah. Um, but there's a sense in which that we are very, I think there's a very deep part of us that is fulfilled
By
when we
work.
are working.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that part of that is the delayed
Of
gratification.
work.
Proverbs talks about the man who, opens his eyes, rolls over in his bed, and goes back to sleep. Crazy that he can't even bring his hand from his bowl to his mouth to eat. And I think that there's a sense in which, yeah, ceasing from engaging with life will always leave us in a very lackluster place. That we are hardwired for that.
Yeah.
That labor quickens us, so to speak. Can it become too much? Yes, which is why God established a 6-day work week with a seventh day of
Right.
rest.
Right.
You know,
And when the
and
rest
I
is
have found
taken
that
in its place, it feels good. When you waited for
well,
that rest day.
yeah, and it's almost, to me, rest can be one of the harder things to
Yeah, that's
accomplish.
true.
It's one thing to work all week. It's another thing to take that time that you have off and use it productively to really rest well,
Right.
instead of wasting that time staring at a screen, actually going for a walk and enjoying, refreshing yourself in creation, or in, engaging in a good book that you didn't have time to read during the week, or whatever, doing things that are still full of life, but that are restful.
Right.
I think that we try to numb ourselves too often by Netflix binging and, doing all these different things. They just serve to numb us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so guilty of this. I mean, this last semester, before, you know, pointed out to me very clearly how much I run away from life to YouTube and Facebook and other things that I use to numb the sensations that a life brings because I haven't learned that cycle of work and enjoyment and rest.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to do that well. And so I don't defer to gratification. I demand instant gratification because I'm trying to satisfy something myself. But in the end, what I'm looking for is just to numb the sensations of a life that's not very fun to live because I don't have those patterns down well.
Right. Yeah. So I don't think we even really need to give any more illustrations. The more I think about it, the more I think, yes, this is definitely something that's hardwired into us. It's the why that I still can't quite figure out. I think that you're onto something with the whole kind of anticipation memory concept. Hit the freedom thing again real quick. Maybe with another example. I'm trying to wrap my mind around that.
Freedom
So you're saying that when you
is
defer the gratification, you feel like it was like you have more control, so you are more free in your actions versus you didn't give
so
in to
I think
the the desire immediately, and when you seek that instant gratification, you feel almost like you're a prisoner to the pleasure. But when you are able to defer
right,
it, you feel more free. Is that right?
right, yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
When I get to decide when I do something and I decide to do it in a controlled way, that desire is not controlling me.
Yeah.
That's particularly relevant because oftentimes the difference between sin and walking in the will of God is time.
Yeah, that's
It's
true.
a time and place situation.
Hmm.
Um,
All things
I
are,
want
everything under the sun. There's a time for everything under the sun, right? But it's
right, right,
not always now.
exactly, right.
Yeah.
We often believe that freedom is the ability to do whatever I want to in the moment. But I think that certainly the Bible describes freedom as well, first of all, do what God wants because we're not really free to do that. If God tells me to do something, my immediate response is to do something else. But
Right.
um, also, in a sense, it's a freedom to refrain from my desires,
Right.
immediate sense, and sometimes in a long-term sense.
So
Some
that's
of those
interesting.
desires should never be fulfilled. you
So
know,
most people see freedom, the world sees freedom as freedom to do whatever you want when you want it.
right,
But the Christian perspective of freedom is freedom to not do what you want when you want it. Uh,
right.
Freedom to
And
not do it, to put it off,
and
and
I'm
to, yeah.
and I'm I would argue that that actually plays into the discussion of deferred gratification as well. That there is freedom in that you experience when you can defer something that you want to a later date. That there's a more wholesome enjoyment. That there's a more complete enjoyment of that thing,
Right.
of that desire, especially if that desire is then in a more right context, in a more right time, whether that be sexuality in marriage, whether that be living within your budget and so avoiding buying a really sweet coffee until you've set some money aside for it ahead of time, and not just buying it on an impulse. Whatever it be, I think that the principle of deferred gratification and the control that and discipline that requires will always provide more pleasure and enjoyment because it's linked to this principle of freedom and what what do we define freedom as and all of those things.
So if you don't mind, Michael, I'm going to give a quick recap, just of what we talked about, because I think there's two main points we've talked about. So we discussed this idea of deferred gratification, how that's hardwired into our systems. We tend to enjoy things more when they are when we defer the gratification, when we defer our enjoyment of it, our participation in it. And then we gave two explanations. One being memory. We tend to remember things more when they're deferred because it makes it less of an instant, in which case there's not much to remember, and more of an event, in which case there's the anticipation, the event, and the memory after the fact. It's just a much, it's less of an instant, more of a time frame that's easier to remember and to keep in our minds. And then the second reason why we think that we might be more we might enjoy things that are deferred more is because of the freedom aspect of it, in which we we enjoy it because when we defer gratification, we are exercising our own self control and we feel in control. Versus when we don't defer it, not to say that deferring it is always necessary, but when we don't defer, there's no element of self control. There's no element of freedom being exercised there. Versus there's an added element of freedom when we do defer, and just that feeling of control actually I think gives us some pleasure as well. Does
Mhm.
that summarize basically what we've talked about?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I think that goes even further when you get into spiritual topics, because then all of a sudden it goes from a matter of me being in control to recognizing that really I didn't have control at all, and all of a sudden because of Christ, I have a capacity to do or not do things that previously I was even unaware of, let alone had the capacity to do. I think of certain acts of love that have been, motivated, or rare points, things that I've done that I knew were beyond my capacity, but happened. Ways that I have loved people, or people that have loved me beyond their capacity. It was very obvious that it was Christ motivating. So I think that discussion of freedom moves you very quickly into the discussion of being bound by sin and being freed from the dominion of sin and the power of sin. And perhaps there is some element of being freed from instant gratification and even deferred gratification to allowing God to be your gratification in
Yeah.
all things.
So here's one more question. I'm sorry I didn't ask this earlier, but it's something that we've been playing with it a little bit. We haven't actually answered it. So the question of, is deferred gratification a good in and of itself?
Hmm.
Or because we self control, I think being able to control yourself, and that's a big aspect of deferred gratification. But is deferred gratification just something that is it good because other things are good that play a role in deferred gratification, or is deferred gratification in and of itself a good?
I think deferred gratification is a structure, because deferred gratification of murdering someone may be more satisfying because you got to plan the murder,
Right.
but that's obviously a very twisted thing. So
Yeah.
we don't want to say that deferred gratification of something negative is innately good.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
but obviously the principle holds that the structure itself probably serves to enhance whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So the person who waits for a long time for vengeance, when it finally arrives, feels more sweet. So perhaps there is an innate structure, system, something that will enhance whatever it is, good or bad, that you're experiencing, and that in and of itself is a property. So deferred gratification might have a property, but the but we have the it's not necessarily good in and of itself. It's just a property that deferred gratification possesses.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael, for coming on.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it, and we'll have you on again. It's always a fun conversation. Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to support this content, please subscribe below.